Hello, here's habit 5, seek first to understand, then to be understood. I will be going over the seek first to understand, and then Sierra will take over seek first to be, or then be understood. So first I'm going to go through 2 different approaches that doctors can take, and that'll give us a greater understanding of why we want to be understood. So the first your doctor enters the examining room and gives you a quick exam. You have questions but feel rushed as you ask them. The doctor gives a quick diagnosis and writes the prescription for a sinus infection. Doctor number 2, your doctor enters the examining room and sits down, listening carefully as you describe your symptoms. The doctor gives you a thorough examination and then asks more questions to make sure he or she understands. Working with you, the doctor arrives at a diagnosis and writes a prescription. So which would you rather have? Probably doctor 2, because they're listening to you, they're understanding what you're saying, and then you can come to a greater resolution. So first we're going to talk about the intent to respond versus the intent to understand. So if you're listening to another person with the intent to respond, then you're not really thinking about what they're saying. You're not trying to understand what they're saying. You're just trying to think of, what can I say to make them feel better, or what can I say to make them feel worse if you're having an aggressive communication. But if you're having the intent to understand, then you're trying to understand, like, what are they trying to say? What do they want from me? What do they want from others? And all that kind of stuff. So with that comes autobiographical listening, which is where you filter what others are saying through your own story, experiences, biases, and values. So there are 4 types of autobiographical responses that you can give. So first there's probing, which is asking questions to get more information, but not necessarily to understand. So for example, like, what happened next, or why would you do that? So these can sound judgy and opinionated, and you don't really want that, because then the other person will kind of just shut down or become aggressive. So next we have evaluate, which is where you're judging or giving your opinion on the matter. So you're saying, like, I totally agree, which I totally agree. You would think that would be a positive thing, but then the other person's not going to say things that you, like, when you don't say, I totally agree with what you're saying, then they're going to just stop talking. Another evaluate response would be you're overreacting. And it's not really your place to say whether or not they're overreacting, because you don't know their emotions and feelings. So more so, you just need to understand why they're thinking the way that they are and why they behave the way that they did. The next autobiographical response is advise, which is just giving unwanted advice. So an example of that is, if I were you, I would blah, blah, blah. The next one is interpret, which is where you're evaluating why they did what they did, or why they're making a certain decision, or whatever. So an example of that is, you were probably trying to blah, 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 but you don't know what they were trying to do, so it's not your place to say that. So autobiographical listening was what I just said, and then empathic listening is listening with the intent to understand and reflecting other people's feelings and words. So to reflect their feelings and words, first you need to identify their feeling. So that could be like annoyed, angry, sad, etc. And then you need to identify the words that they're using to describe the feeling or what happened. So an example of this is, someone says, it's a waste of time to do these reports, nobody even reads them. So the feeling, they sound annoyed, and then the words that they're using, they're saying you're creating, or the words that you would say that you're understanding they're saying is, you're creating reports that nobody reads. So the feelings and words that you should reflect is, you feel annoyed that you're spending time on reports that nobody reads. And this is kind of like, it'll be an emotional release for them to not feel like they're getting somebody else's input, to not feel like they're being judged for what they're saying, and just reflect what they're saying. It'll make them feel understood. It'll make them feel good. So with empathic listening, you can use clarifying questions, but make sure you're not probing. So make sure these questions are not coming from autobiographical responses. Yeah, okay. So then just some signals to know when you should stop and understand versus when it's okay for you to start going forward and be understood. So we have the red light, which is stop talking and listen empathically. So you should do this when emotion is high, you don't understand what the person is saying, or the other person isn't feeling understood. So the way to know if the other person isn't feeling understood is you can just take some signals from them if they're seeming like they're getting frustrated, or if they tell you, I don't think you're understanding what I'm saying. The yellow light is be ready to listen empathically. So this is when emotion is rising and some other signals seem imminent. And then last is green, which is seek to be understood. So this means you pretty much feel like you understand what the other person says. In theory, you completely understand what the other person's saying, but that's maybe not exactly how it happens every time. Or the other person asks you to talk. So they say like, I don't think I can get my point across until I understand what you're saying. But yeah, so that's all I have. And next up is Sierra with Seek to be Understood.